sentience. And what you've described there is being reduced down to our bodies. We're speaking about the mental health impact, but when we're not even acknowledged to even have mental health in itself. I wonder, based on all those things that you said, what are the direct impacts? We cannot divorce the current and the present from the historical. We're talking about transgenerational trauma and how that shapes the psyche, and how it shapes us moving through the world. I mean, just considering the mental health of Black people collectively, how does that historical context impact on A, our mental health, and B, how our mental health is seen?
I think it's that whenever, how it impacts internally on us and on our mental health is whenever then you have, it imbues this idea of otherness, I think, and this idea of not belonging, which is corrosive, internally. I also see within a lot of people that they don't necessarily make a link between mental health conditions that people are admitted under, and then also the historical aspects that they have lived through just within their direct family system, not to mention, this intergenerational legacy that I'm talking about. And then I think there's the other layer on top of that, which is what it means to exist in a space where the statistics that we have from the NHS for the last 3 to 5 years, Black people are more likely to be subject to physical restraint whilst in inpatient settings. That's also indicative earlier on in the education system, which maybe you can speak to more, where Black children are more likely to be expelled from school, or in alternative provisions or settings where children might be I was thinking about boarding schools for children with additional needs. Excuse me, my brain just went offline for a minute. But in those settings, similarly, we do see an overrepresentation of force being used on children and populations in those communities who are Black. So it's really hard to begin to put into context all of the threads that make up people's experiences, but it's a daily experience of questioning self and also questioning self in relation to others, that interpersonal play. And then I think one last effect that I see daily through my work is people just carry on. We as Black people often don't acknowledge the weight that there is to carry on a daily basis, and something else that Dr. Elaine speaks about is this idea that whenever an experience of racial trauma or othering or whatever it might be, whether it's something discrete or whether it's something very explicit, whenever we experience something like that, we have the pain in the moment, but it's also tapping into this intergenerational wound which is being opened up, this intergenerational sense of not being human, being subhuman or not being valued. So I think the stoicism that can exist within our communities is part of the impact, which is why sometimes people don't find themselves accessing support earlier. People maybe either don't choose to access support, haven't got the means to access support because of other, social factors, economic factors, or then cultural factors such as this belief that we don't need support, we're okay, and we just get on with it. And I know you speak about this quite a lot, but any of us who I'm of Caribbean descent, any of us our Caribbean descent will be very familiar with elders saying, we didn't deal with that. You shouldn't talk about that. Keep it inside the house. Don't speak about your challenges. All of these narratives and stories that we tell ourselves feeds into this stoicism and this intergenerational wound of being strong and of continuing. And then the external reality of that, as I was yesterday speaking to another, actually someone I'm about to start seeing, the reality is that when we have the experiences of systemic and institutional racism, sometimes, despite their best efforts, services don't pick up on the needs of families. Services don't pick up on the needs of individuals. Sometimes we as therapists, if we don't have a sensitivity and an understanding to these cultural experiences, these experiences of racism, we also sometimes are not attuning to the needs of the individual in the room, and I think that's something that we need to do better with.
Thank you, Sarita.
Can I say, sorry, because
I was just about to ask you about it. So
apologise, just
good timing.
I was just saying, I think one addition to what you were saying there is that the added institutions, organisations, etc., that are also telling us, I guess, as the black community, if we use that term, that it no longer exists, that these things shouldn't upset us anymore. Oh well, slavery was 400 plus years ago, so why are you still bothered, etc., etc. Yeah. And I think that again highlights that questioning bit, because it's as you said, we've got family members maybe saying to us, just keep going, you need to make the money, you need to do this, get yourself a good government job and just think. But then it's like, okay, you've got this good government job, but then you're in this good government job and the government job is gaslighting you. The people around you are making you feel unseen, othered, you're experiencing racism, etc. And I think in a recent piece of work that I did with a British High Commission based in an island in the Caribbean, try not to be specific, based in an island in the Caribbean, was that their what they call their country-based staff and their UK-based staff were having a lot of friction. And it was about the fact that there was just a lot of colonial mirroring. There was a lot of, there was still, all the leadership was white and male, all the, the lower, I guess, ranks were not, and they just did not want to see that racism, colonial legacy, etc., was playing a part. And even when you tried to bring people into the conversation about it, there was just a real resistance to look at this and say, maybe when this white male shouts and screams at this black woman, maybe something else is being triggered, as opposed to just, sometimes in leadership positions you get angry. So I think, again, there's that sense of there's no connection with the generational trauma that is being experienced by people on a day-to-day basis.
I'm going to come in again, sorry, Richie.
This is why, I'm not the expert on the panel, so you could all come in as much as you like.
So a couple of things in relation to what you said. And later on this afternoon, we're going to have a conversation bringing in therapists who are in the Caribbean, as well as a therapist who's based in Africa. But I'm going to say now, one of the things that I know they often tell me, or we spoke about, it's not always, you've got the explicit examples that you've mentioned, but it's even in the subtleties that Caribbean people in the Caribbean expect and know that they will be paid less as someone from the island than any expats. And that is not just about race. If I went over and worked in the Caribbean as a black woman, most likely I would be paid more, because there's this valuation again of external being better. We can see again the hierarchy in play. The other thing that I wanted to add to that is, and it is something that's in this intergenerational work that Dr. Alain's done, but it's this idea that every 30 years or so, we see re-emergences of tension, racial tension. We're in a period at the minute where we've got a system across the political system where we are not expressing hospitability, and instead we're expressing hostility to others. Currently, the language of that is being organised around immigrants, not any specific immigrants, but immigrants. It's the same thing, and then 30 years before we look at not even 30 years before we look at the uprisings in this country and in the US in 2011 onwards. We also go earlier on to look at the uprisings in this country in the 1980s, which were very specifically about race relation work, which started with the black community, which people often forget. It started because of the activism and the dehumanising experiences that people within the black community were having. Bernie Grant's pictures were seen earlier. He was very much part of that work. Then we go 30 years before that, or 20 years before that, and we look at the hostilities that were experienced in relation to Windrush migration, in relation to migration from the continent in the 10 years thereafter. I think we don't speak so much about the legacy of migration from African continents into this country. We often speak about Windrush. And there's a tension that comes as a result of that. Now, the reason I'm saying these things is there's something about otherness that instills, and blackness that invites violent othering for the therapists within the room, violent projection, as the bad other, the evil other, etc., or the feared other, or the incompetent other, and so it goes on. And that, as I say, it's not exclusive to our particular community, but I think the way in which it manifests towards black people in this violence of being